but we want to address them.
These
We
are
want to address them.
I know, but Robert's just going in. So are you going to start before they come in?
Well, that was the,
Yeah, why don't you start?
No,
that was
because
the plan.
I
I need
was
to
going
know
to
that. I need
address
to know.
them.
Okay, stop.
And then,
What?
yeah, I was going to ask them questions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but they're not here to ask.
They're going to come in 2 minutes. Just wait and do it then.
Are we going in now? You're curious, okay. Yeah? How are we
Good
doing?
evening, everyone. My name is Mike Patz. I'm National Chair of the Jewish Labour Movement. And of course, this is Margaret Hodge. I'm new Parliamentary Chair of the Jewish Labour Movement. Welcome to LGS tonight for Labour Leadership Hustings 2020. As you may know, such was the demand for tickets we had to move from our usual venue of JW3. And huge thanks to Rowan and all our friends at JW3 who have helped make tonight happen. An event on this scale befits JLM's growth and size and influence. I'm proud to say that we are now over 4,000 members. When we mark the centenary of our affiliation to the Labour Party, 100 years of unbroken history as the sole voice for Jewish people in the Labour Party. Of course, we nearly didn't make it. Last year we came close to disaffiliating. We didn't. We chose to stay and fight for moments like this, when we have a say in the future of our party, our movement and the country. So when the Labour Party announces just a couple of days ago they've expelled 25 members for anti-Semitism, we say that quite frankly, that is too little, too late. Friends, those expulsions are 4 years overdue. What has become of our party, the Labour Party, that anti-Semites, racists, Holocaust deniers think that they should join in the first place, that Labour is their natural political home? And of course, it is that failure to act. Top prize. It is that failure to act. That failure to act has led to Labour being investigated by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, an eternal stain on the party's reputation. We've always said that fixing the party is more than just policies and processes, it's about politics and leadership. And that's why there's such huge interest, as we see from this crowd tonight, across the whole Jewish community in the leadership election. Put simply, it's make or break time for Labour and the Jewish community.
Thanks, Mike. Is it on? No. Right, I thought it was. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to say a few words, and thank you for nominating me as the Parliamentary Chair of the Jewish Labour Movement. It really is an honour and a privilege. But I have to say it's also a very sad reflection on what's happened to Jewish MPs, particularly over the last 4 years, because I am virtually the last Jewish woman Labour MP left standing. If you look at Jewish MPs over history, if you Google it, you'll see that after the war and before sort of the mid-70s, most Jewish MPs were Labour MPs. There were 42 Labour MPs in the 25 years after the war. One Jewish MP was a communist, and 14 Jewish MPs who were Tories, because being in the Labour Party was the natural home for Jews. Sadly, we're not in that position today. And I want to pay real tribute and send sisterly greetings to those Labour women with whom I've worked over the last 4 years. Ruth Smith, who's with us tonight, anti-Semitism that hasn't just penetrated the Labour Party, but that has chronically infected our Labour Party. I hope the candidates, I was hoping they'd be in when I said all this, but they're not, so maybe somebody will answer. I hope our candidates tonight will tell us how they will reach out to those women and other ex-MPs like Ian Austin and Joan Ryan, and recognise the pain that they all experienced and the integrity and the courage that they all showed. Their contribution to our lasting values and aims has been squandered by the anti-Semitism that has been at the heart of the Labour Party. I think for all of us, I felt it, the last 4 years for me have been the most miserable, challenging and lonely years in my nearly 60 years of membership of the Labour Party. And I know that that's what every Jew sitting here tonight feels too. Yet since the Hustings started, I felt slightly I've been living in Alice in Wonderland in the party. The history of the last 4 years is being rapidly rewritten by those who are seeking our support. Yes, shadow members of Cabinet would every now and then decry anti-Semitism in the media interviews. But where were their voices, when we needed them most? Leadership to act. It's no good voicing your disgust in the privacy of a shadow cabinet room. That's not what anti-racism, that's not what fighting Jew hate, that's not what fighting anti-Semitism is about. Had they been bolder, had they been braver, had they been louder, then we might have halted the advance of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And I think we need an explanation tonight as to why they only did it mainly privately. Finally, I do, like all of us, welcome all the promises that they're making to eradicate anti-Semitism. But I'd also like to know what they will do and when they'll clean up not just the Labour Party HQ, where senior party officials remain responsible for taking action on anti-Semitism allegations. And they include staff who, for example, thought that the image of an alien creature with the Star of David on its back smothering the Statue of Liberty was not anti-Semitism but anti-Israel. And my sincere apologies for using this language, particularly in a shul, but this is what it's all about. Staff who deliberately delayed the investigation into an individual who called Ruth Smeeth and I Zionist cumbuckets. Whether it's officials, whether it's elected representatives, whether it's party members, we in JLM and JLM in Parliament will hold whoever becomes leader to public account. And my commitment to you is I will not cease fighting until we are clear that we have eradicated anti-Semitism from the soul of our great nation.
Briefly myself. Firstly, to let you know the event is being filmed and live streamed. It's a question time format. We asked all for questions in advance. You bombarded us, so thank you very much. And picked the very best. And our fantastic moderator of the evening, Rob Preston, will absolutely grill candidates, and he'll make sure that they can't obfuscate or deny or try and avoid the question. But we all want to hear what all the candidates have to say. So applaud all you want, but please be respectful. Don't boo, heckle, or interrupt. After all, as Margaret said, we're in shul now. And all I'd say is finally, putting on events like this doesn't come cheap for a lay movement like the Jewish Labour Movement and our partners. So if you're proud of our movement and what we've achieved, you can help us continue the fight. Please go to jewishlabour.uk and donate what you can, or if you want to give more, come and find me and we can talk about that. All that's left for me to do now very quickly is to hand over to Adrian Cohen, who's the late chair of Labour Friends of Israel, who's going to introduce the candidates.
It's great to see such a crowd here this evening. I'm the lay chair of Labour Friends of Israel. I should explain what that is a little. I met Tony Blair a couple of years ago, and I introduced myself as the lay chair of Labour Friends of Israel, and he looked at me quizzically and I said, it's a little bit like being the chair of the Extreme Sports Society. And I don't think he was quite paying attention, because he then said to me, you're the chair of the Extreme Sports Society. Well, anyway, it does feel like that quite often. I'd like to welcome, hopefully they'll be coming through the door soon, the 4 candidates for being with us this evening and participating in this evening's debate. And of course our moderator, Robert Peston, too. I'd like to thank the Liberal Jewish Synagogue, and in particular Paul Rubin, for hosting us, and our 3 partners, the Jewish Labour Movement, Labour Friends of Israel, and Jewish News, and all their staff for organising it. And thank you to those providing our security this evening. I should also thank Ed for the live stream, JW3, the security here this evening, and the many volunteers who have helped make this event possible. And finally to the indefatigable Rebecca Filer, who has put so much together. And of course, maybe it's premature to thank you all for coming, because we haven't sat through what's going to happen, but thank you very much for coming along this evening as well. As we'll all be aware, the past 5 years has been an incredibly difficult period for the relationship between the Jewish community and the Labour Party, and especially for Jewish members of the party. We're all grateful for those, especially in the Jewish Labour Movement and Labour Friends of Israel and others, who have stood up and spoken out against anti-Semitism in the party. Whatever our politics, the kind of breakdown in relations that we have seen between any party and a community in this country is very destructive to civic society and damaging to our democracy. We hope that this leadership election will offer the opportunity to begin the process of rebuilding trust and confidence. It's less a case of drawing a line under the last 5 years as opening a conversation, an open and honest one, in which the hurt, fear and anger of the Jewish community needs to be listened to and engaged with and addressed. The kind of conversation indeed that I hope we will see begin this evening. That conversation will of course only be fruitful and meaningful, as Margaret said, if it's accompanied by action, tough and swift action to rid the party of anti-Semitism, and in particular anti-Semitic anti-Zionism, and to re-establish a culture free of bigotry and bullying so that Jews can feel safe in the Labour Party once again. Many past Labour leaders have been great allies of the Jewish community here in Britain and firm friends of the world's only Jewish state. We very much hope that whichever of the candidates wins on the 4th of April, they will have that goal firmly in their minds. Thank you very much.
Broadly, whichever you like. I'm going to be here, so. Lovely. Wow. Thank you very much. Can we pass these along? Hello, can you all hear me? Yes. Is my microphone not on? Who knows? Can anybody tell? No, right. You can hear me though, yes? Yes. You can't hear me? Flipping it. All right, I'll have to use one of these. Okay. Right, is that better? No, still not better. Bloody hell. It's a bit tough crowd. It's on? What's gone wrong? All right. Hello. It's still pretty rubbish, isn't it? It is pretty rubbish, this.
This one works.
Okay, we found a competent Jewish technician. I'm thrilled. Right. It's still really not there, is it? Right, shall I borrow this one?
Try that.
Hello. Yes! Right. Anyway, it's a joy to be here. It must be a big night because my mum's here. Now, I'm going to make my apology early. Right at the end, I'm going to have to rush. Some of you may have noticed that the government launched a coup against Her Majesty's Treasury, which I'm going to have to say something about on the news. So if I do rush off at the end, don't take it personally. Now, we are here to grill these 4 candidates to be leader of Her Majesty's opposition. And before we start, I do want to say one thing. I know all of these individuals extremely well, and they're all thoroughly nice, thoroughly decent people, and they're doing a very tough job, and we have to treat them with respect, because, you know, we're just bloody lucky to have people in this country prepared to put their necks on the chopping block for our welfare. And even if we disagree with them, we have to pay them the respect that they deserve. Now, let's kick off straight away. We're going to have 4 sections: anti-Semitism, extremism, social care in Israel. It won't surprise you that we're going to spend most time on the issue of anti-Semitism. And we're going to start with a question, please, from Jess Ansell. Where's Jess? Hello, Jess. Would you like to ask a question?
I'm sure you're aware both the Jewish Labour movement and the broader Jewish community lost their confidence in the Labour Party over anti-Semitism. As a Jewish student, I faced anti-Semitism both from fellow students and, arguably more concerningly, from university lecturers. The fact that this is so prevalent in our universities should come as a real concern to any future Labour Party leader. What are you going to do to regain our community's trust?
Okay. So let's just start with Rebecca.
Well, can you hear me?
Take my one. Right. This is all being so well organised.
So in Salford, the community that I represent, the hurt and the anxiety that we felt from our community was palpable. The anger was palpable. And in Greater Manchester, where we've had some of the greatest Jewish MPs, trade unionists and councillors, it was absolutely devastating to see what they faced and to see that our Jewish community just didn't feel safe or welcome within our party. It was absolutely shameful that we were in that situation. And we have to say sorry, and I'll say sorry again tonight. We have not tackled this issue within the party, and all of us as leadership candidates have to act as one of our first missions to rebuild that trust. And that involves many things. It involves making sure that we have processes within the party that are legally independent, free from any political bias or interference. It involves educating our members and everyone across our movement to spot the conspiracy theories and the tropes that are emerging, sadly, right across the left. And it's about making sure that we call out anti-Semitism where we find it. I have members that come up to me from time to time and they say to me, Rebecca, we don't have any anti-Semitic comments in our meetings. And I always say to them, well, that's great, you're lucky. But I've seen what we see online, I've seen what my friends face, the tropes, the disgusting comments that are made, everything from Holocaust denial all the way through to blaming people within our community for every atrocity under the sun. And that involves tackling that within the Labour Party and then rebuilding that trust within the community. I've said very clearly that I'll adopt all of the Board of Deputies' 10 pledges. I'll act upon the recommendations that are made by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which I find quite shameful that we are a party that is now being investigated by them. And we have to act quickly to rebuild that trust.
The truth is that before the last general election, there was a minority in Britain who thought, some of whom thought, rightly or wrongly, and I think wrongly, but who genuinely thought that if the Labour Party was elected to government, that they would be less safe. And that absolutely disgusts me as being a member of the Labour Party, someone who was born into the Labour Party and will die in the Labour Party. somebody who believes that the Labour Party is a party of equality and a party where we should be welcoming, where we hold ourselves to a higher standard than any other. I'm so sorry, is that better? Can you hear me? Like, so that's the trick. You put it onto your bottom lip and then it works. I said that I was appalled that there was a minority in Britain who believed, or some of whom believed, rightly or wrongly, I believe wrongly, but who genuinely believed that they would be less safe if the Labour Party was elected into government. And what on earth was happening to my party? The party I was born into, the party I will die in, the party I am so proud of. And a party that is supposed to be a party of equality and has always been at the forefront of fighting racism in all its forms. And how on earth we had got to that place. And I think that I have said on many occasions that it's very easy to lose trust and it takes a very long time to get that trust back. And we need to be on platforms like this, we need to be engaging with the Jewish community in Britain again and again. I think many of the people, when I look around this room, I kind of know a lot of people here because I do go out of my way to ensure that I go to events. And people are very angry with the Labour Party and they shout at me. And I get it. I take it on the chin and I go to the next meeting and people have another go at me. But we have to do that and we have to engage and we have to apologise. And we need to be, if we're going to be a party of government, then we have to be a party that will lead the whole of the country, not just parts of it. And how we got into this mess is another issue. But the fact is we are. And we may be in a position where we're chucking out dozens of anti-Semites now, but why on earth did we not do it 2.5 years ago? That's the point, isn't it? And so we need to make sure that we move forward, and we absolutely have to deal with this issue. When elected leader, the elected leader will have political capital, and what she needs to do is to use that political capital to ensure that we sort the Labour Party out. And frankly, the first thing I would do is get on the phone to the Equality and Human Rights Commission and say, where's your report? You know, and I've taken a long time. I don't want to take the Labour Party off in this direction and then for your report to say we should go in this direction. Let's work together. Let's actually get ourselves a unit that can deal with the anti-Semitism and other forms of extremism and other forms of abuse within the Labour Party. Let's set up an example of good practice. And then I get on the phone to the Tories and say, I think maybe you'd like to copy what we have because you have issues in your party too. But my party should be of a higher standard than any other party, because my party is the Labour Party.
Jess, I'm sorry. To the wider community, I'm sorry that we let our party get into the state where you lost faith in us. I'm sorry, Jess. If you're anti-Semitic, you shouldn't be in the Labour Party. We've overcomplicated this. If you're anti-Semitic, you should be out. That should be the focus. And the only way through this is through leadership, strong leadership. Because the person at the top of the organisation has to send very, very strong signals about what happens next. And this has to be a day one issue, so far as I'm concerned. I've run a big organisation. I know what happens if the person at the top of the organisation says, I want a line of sight on this, and I want things to change. And whether that's process which had to change, we've had lots of arguments about process. We've argued about the definition, about auto-exclude, etc. All those rule changes that are necessary, but it's also about values and culture. And that depends on the person who's leading the party showing that leadership. And that's what I will do. We need to stand by the Jewish community whenever there are attacks, whether it's Pittsburgh, whether it's Paris, or whether it's just down the road here in Southampton, where we had anti-Semitic graffiti just over the Christmas period. We stand together, we rebuild that trust. The way I've dealt with this in the last 5 years in Camden is to work with the Jewish community day in, day out. Whenever there are tensions, whenever there are interfaith issues that need to be dealt with. And that's the way that I would lead our party. I have argued for rule changes. That is process, but there needs to be culture and values. culture and values. And the test that I would now set for our party isn't one about rules. It's a test that I spoke to Louise Elman about when she left our party, because we lost Luciana, we lost Louise. And on the Monday after Louise left, I had a discussion with her in private and said to her I would not be satisfied we'd dealt with this unless people like Louise felt that she could rejoin and be comfortable in our party. And that's my test, whether those that have left us feel that they can comfortably come back to the Labour Party. And only when that happens will I be satisfied that we've dealt with this. I realise this is going to take time. This is going to take time, but if I'm leader, it starts on day one. Thank you.
I'm ashamed of where this party has got to, where we've lost all of our moral authority over this issue. And more than that, that we've caused real damage to people out there in the country. I'm angry about that too, and I'm really, really sorry. But you deserve more than my anger and my sorrow. As many of my friends who've had to bear the brunt of fighting these battles on the front line over the last few years, Luciana, Ruth, Louise, who haven't just had to fight racism, they've had to fight misogyny as well in our party. As they have said to me many, many times before, what they want most is honesty and they want action. And anti-Semitism, let's be honest, is a particular sort of racism. It is different to other sorts of racism. It's the sort of racism that punches up, not down, that argues that Jewish people are privileged and powerful, and because there are people on the left who believe that their job is to challenge privilege and power, therefore wrongly and disgracefully argue that Jewish people are a legitimate target for racism. That is what has been allowed to enter our party, and it is a poison. It is the canary in the coal mine, and unless it is addressed, it will poison us and everything that we do. And that is why, when I served in the shadow cabinet, the only time I broke collective responsibility and spoke out against my own party leadership was when there was a high-profile case of anti-Semitism and a complete and utter refusal to deal with it and to follow our rules and to issue a suspension from the top of the party. And by refusing to speak out, we gave the green light to anti-Semites that they had a natural home in the Labour Party. And I spoke out because not to do so would have made me complicit in something I wasn't prepared to tolerate. Now, Luciana said to me not long after that, "This cannot be my fight alone." I understood that and I recognised that. I recognised that because I know what racism feels like. I'm half Indian and my dad has experienced racism all his life. And it should never be left to those who are dealing with this and experiencing this to fight those battles. So whether it was on the mural, on the definition of anti-Semitism, or on those brave, brave whistleblowers who spoke out from the Labour Party, I have stood up and spoken out over and over again because this will never be your fight alone. So let me say this. Honesty is needed, a reckoning with how badly we have let you down, and action is necessary. As a bare minimum, I will implement the EHRC recommendations, but that is a minimum, and that is my promise to you. And I will implement an independent process, because never ever again should we or can we allow factions or friends of the leadership to interfere in our fight against racism in all its forms and in tackling anti-Semitism. That is my promise to you, and I'll tell you why. One, because it's the right thing to do, and you are owed and deserve this. As the affiliate that helped to found this party, you are owed nothing less. But two, because this is existential for the Labour Party. We cannot claim to be the party that will build a more compassionate, fairer, equal society, free from discrimination, if we cannot even get this right in our own party. I have spoken out over and over again over the last 3 years. At times, I've been told I will be deselected for doing it,
But I promise you, never again will people like me, and most of all, like many of you in this room, be forced to choose between standing up for what is right and standing up for the Labour Party. That is the leadership I will show.
So there's a lot to get our teeth into in those opening statements. I'm now going to move on to a sort of a why question and a what question, which I would like all of you to address. Try not to spend quite as much time in these answers as you did in those opening ones, because we have got a lot to get through. I say that in the kindest possible way. And the why question is this. Labour did much better than many people expected in the 2017 election, and then anti-Semitism exploded as an issue that summer, massively knocked the party off course, and it then took, well, arguably the problem is still not sorted. Why has it taken this Labour Party so long to tackle the scandal of anti-Semitism? And secondly, and this is something that I think everybody in this room wants to know, it's not just because of if they've got to vote, how they're going to vote. We're not going to put this behind us as an issue unless people understand precisely what happened, the pathology of this thing over the past couple of years. So they will want to know, what have you done over the past couple of years to try and eliminate the scourge of anti-Semitism? And I'm afraid I probably ought to start with you, Becky, partly because, you know, last night on Newsnight, Emily sort of suggested you didn't do enough in the shadow cabinet, and you were on the NEC. So I do want to give you an opportunity to say, as I say, why it took so long and what you have personally done in this respect.
So I'll start with the why first. I mean, we saw our party increase dramatically in 2015, and that was a great thing, largely. But with that increase came members who, quite frankly, shouldn't have been within our party. They were anti-Semitic. And when we found those cases of anti-Semitism becoming more prevalent within the party and across the wider left, we didn't tackle it quickly enough. We didn't have processes that were capable of spotting them and processing it quickly enough. And when we realised that the processes weren't fit for purpose, we didn't tackle it robustly enough. Then we had a breakdown of trust between ourselves and our Jewish communal organisations, and indeed the Jewish labour movement, because we weren't opening and having dialogue and listening to what they were asking us to do. I think there was a bit of a bunker that formed, and unfortunately that bunker remained for many years and created a further escalation of the crisis. We also didn't act on those really insidious and poisonous conspiracy theories that were permeating across the left and across the movement, and reaching many of our members who wouldn't class themselves as anti-Semitic. They'd be appalled if anyone thought they were anti-Semitic. But quite often they were sharing memes and Twitter things that were, you know, calling out the actions of the Israeli government, but they were anti-Semitic. And they needed to be educated to spot those conspiracy theories and tropes. And that's why we needed a robust educational programme delivered in partnership with the Jewish Labour
Becky,
movement.
did you stand up at any point and call it out?
I did, but was that enough? No,
When?
it wasn't. And what I did was I did speak in Shadow Cabinet about this a few times. I did speak privately to a number of people within the party and called for various actions to take place, all the way through from auto expulsions to an independent process, through to feeding back the comments that had been made to me by meeting my local Jewish representatives and their anguish and angst about what was happening within the party. But did I do enough, and could I have done more? Yes. Because we're still within this crisis. And that's why, as leader, I want to set this straight and I want to do the right thing. We've got a long path to travel to rebuild trust within our community, certainly with the Jewish community, and that will take time, but we start by having robust processes. We start by teaching and educating our own members, and that starts with the leadership, providing that moral compass for our party.
I mean, just to be clear, you know, I don't think this was just about process. Processes were, to use a technical phrase, shit in the Labour Party over this. But let's be clear, this is a moral issue. And I quite like all of you just to address a question, okay, which I think is relevant to all of this. Do you regard it as anti-Semitic to describe Israel, its policies, or the circumstances around its foundation as racist because of their discriminatory impact? Is that an anti-Semitic statement?
Yes. Yeah.
Right, so Jeremy Corbyn presented to the NEC a document in which he wanted the NEC to approve, which would have said that that statement is not anti-Semitic. That was a disgrace, wasn't it?
Well, I can't remember the exact words, but
I've got the words. I covered it at the time. It was a story I reported on. It was an extraordinary moment. I don't understand why, since the NEC did in the end approve the document, at that point there wasn't a deeper reckoning. This was back in 2018. I don't understand why there wasn't a deeper reckoning.
So I think you're referring to the code of conduct that was brought in to try and implement the IRA definition and example.
It was at the time in which you were having this debate about the IHRA definition, and when people like Seamus Milne were desperately trying to prevent you from implementing it in full, and Jeremy brought to the NEC a compromise statement that most people would have said was straightforwardly anti-Semitic.
So I'll provide some clarity as an NEC member. We were presented with a code of conduct. I think we were unanimous right across the NEC wanting to adopt IRA in full and all of the examples. And we were presented with a code of conduct that's set out, as we were told, ways that we could use this correctly within our processes. Now, at the time, it was never put to a vote, as far as I can remember, and it was supposedly going to be consulted upon. It was later found that we hadn't consulted with our Jewish communal organisations on this. And then the next NEC meeting, with the pain and the anguish that we understood that this code of conduct caused, IRA and the full list of examples was implemented, and I was fully in support of IRA and all of their examples, and I need to be perfectly clear on that.
Okay, but as I say, it's still not quite clear to me why this wasn't the moment of reckoning. But Emily, it was September the 4th, 2018. You weren't on the NEC. You were on the shadow. Still in the shadow cabinet. Do you remember this whole period?
Yeah, I remember this whole period. I remember that we'd had a whole summer of wrangling about it beforehand, and I had been in and spoken to the leader's office about it and made it clear that the extreme interpretations of IRA that people were bandying around just were not the sort of thing that people frankly should spend any time worrying about, because the code was the code and the implementation would of course be done against a background of good sense, and you can always kind of think of the most extreme example, but frankly we should adopt the code and all its examples, and I said so a number of times. I had also said before that, after meetings that I'd had with the Board of Deputies and with the Chief Rabbi and various other groups, that before this happened, that the Jewish community in Britain was losing confidence in the Labour Party, and that I was really worried about it, and that we had to start doing something about it, and we had to start engaging. And I was told that it wasn't my business, and that my business was to be Shadow Foreign Secretary. And so, as Shadow Foreign Secretary, I have always made it clear that it is our duty, frankly, to call out the actions of the far-right government of Netanyahu and what it is that that government is doing to the two-state solution, and that we should do so. But that to conflate that with the actions of the Jews or the Jewish community is simply anti-Semitic. I made a speech in 2018 in Liverpool where there had been 2 speeches made immediately beforehand that were anti-Israeli, and there was a sea of Palestinian flags. And I had written a speech, and those members of the press who'd had it in advance, one of them said to somebody in my team, "She's never going to be able to make this speech now." And we did think, we'd seen that there was a potential that someone was going to get onto the stage and demonstrate, because I'm a member of Labour Friends of Israel. But I got on and I did the speech. And I said that whilst one has to call out the actions of the Netanyahu government, that must never be a cloak for the disgusting anti-Semitism that was in our midst, and that we had to do something about it, and that we should be kicking out these people as the Liverpudlians did Oswald Mosley in the 1930s. And that's what I said. So I have always made it clear what our policy, our foreign policy should be as the Labour Party, made it clear that it was what the parameters are, and to make it clear to Labour Party members that they should and can, and frankly I think should, speak out against what this far-right government in Israel is doing, but that there is a deep difference between that and blaming somebody who lives in a flat in St John's Wood for the death of Palestinian children. And to keep having to say that, as I do in Labour Party meetings up and down the country, it's what I do, and I've always done so. I have warned within the Labour Party for a number of years what the problem has been. I have continued to engage with the Jewish population of Britain, and I did it within the Shadow Cabinet because I felt that it was the right thing to do, and have had an impact in terms of the manifestos, to make sure the manifesto was even-handed in relation to Israel and Palestine, and to make sure that some of the things that were said in Parliament were even-handed, and that much of what was said in the press by the Labour Party leadership was also even-handed. So I did my utmost to play my part, and that is what I've been doing over the last few years.
Okay, I'm going to ask a very easy follow-up for all of you. Given the magnitude of this issue in the moral sense, did any of you think of ever resigning over this?
Robert, can I just deal with the broad swathe of questions, including that? You asked why did it take so long. The processes were bad, and they were slow. And in addition to that, because it wasn't just processes, the question of which part of the party you're from got tangled up with what have you said or done. And once you're in that slippery slope, no process can ever get you back. And there was a lack of leadership on it. You said then, well, what did we do? Well, I spoke out publicly on the Today programme, on the Andrew Marr programme, and Robert, you challenged me on your programme. And the one I spoke out about was the definition. I said we should accept the international definition. And I went and saw Jeremy and said we should accept the international definition. I then went out and said, because the next thing that happened, if you recall, was some people said, this is all exaggerated. It's a political fight. And so I went out on the Today programme and said, those that are denying we've got a problem are part of the problem, and spoke out again, because I could see that it wasn't just... It wasn't just the individuals who were being anti-Semitic, it was those that were then circling the wagons around them to say that this was being exaggerated. So I went out and said, denying the problem is part of the problem. I then argued for auto-exclude. And I did that after conversations with people in this room who came to me and said, Keir, I need to tell you what it's like to be a Jewish member of your party at meetings. People in this room took me through that quietly, what it felt. And I felt, and they were very strongly of the view that there should be an auto-exclude. So I argued for that. I argued against individual cases, Ken Livingstone, Chris Williamson. And then when the Equality and Human Rights Commission investigated, which was a low moment, I played a part and supported the setting up of an Equality and Human Rights Commission. It didn't occur to me for 1 minute that would be looking into our party. And I knew how organisations respond to investigations. They either open the books and say, here's all the records, have access to all the staff, tell us where we're getting it wrong, give us early recommendations. That's if they want to fix it. Or they circle the wagons. You can't look here, you can't look here. So I said, we've got to adopt the open approach. Let them in. Let's ask for preliminary findings so we can get on with something. I then went on to independent complaints process. Now, I wasn't an instant convert to this because I could see there were arguments either way. But it became clear to me that the trust of the Jewish community was never going to be restored if we didn't have an independent process. And then finally, Robert, I said in public after my discussion with Louise Ellman that the test for our party should be whether people feel they can return to it. I do want to say one other thing, because we're challenged on this. We spoke up in Shadow Cabinet. We had a lot of rows, and I want to pay tribute to Emily, because she spoke up loud and clear. And you can imagine when Emily speaks up, she does speak loud, she does speak clear. And this is a tribute, because we had rows in that Shadow Cabinet. Sometimes the row went on for the whole of the meeting in the Shadow Cabinet, where we were challenging hard on the definition, on auto-exclude, where we were saying we need to see the evidence in Shadow Cabinet, because it was being said this is a matter for the NEC. And we said we're the political leadership.
The NEC aren't doing anything about
it.
it.
We're the political leadership.
We said they're not doing anything about it, so the Shadow Cabinet, we have to try and take control of this, because if the NEC aren't going to deal with it, then we need to.
And I said we must have periodic reports. It's no good saying the process has improved. We need to see that it's improved with periodic reports. And so those arguments were going on in the Shadow Cabinet. Now, I didn't break rank and tell people what's going in the Shadow Cabinet on this or anything else, because I don't think you should.
Yeah.
But I don't think people should be left with the impression that there weren't very, very loud voices in that Shadow Cabinet arguing on all of the issues I've just gone through.
Lisa.
Well, to address the second part of your question, yes, I've considered my position in the Labour Party over the last few years, to be honest, when good friends of mine, including Louise Ellman, who my family has known for decades, feel that they have no place in the Labour Party. Of course you question that. You question that every single day. I'd left the Shadow Cabinet in 2016 after speaking out about the Naz Shah incident. It was a factor in why I didn't return. And the reason that it was a factor is because I believe that you speak out and you speak up in private and you try and get something done, but if you can't get something done and it's still wrong, then you leave and you speak out and you speak up and you make sure that something is done. And you asked why anti-Semitism exploded in that summer and then was allowed to get to where it got. Well, because, first of all, we refused to act on a series of high-profile cases and we gave a green light to people who were anti-Semites that Labour would provide a home for them. Then we compounded that process because we set up a process that was defensive, that wasn't transparent, that was staffed by very junior people and that was completely unable and unwilling to deal with the extent of the cases that we had in the time that was needed. And that then was allowed to morph into a denial of the problem itself. And once that had morphed into a denial of the problem itself, there were a series of actions which doubled down on this. The attack on Margaret when she was suspended from the Labour Party, the sort of language that was allowed to go unchallenged about this problem, describing it as smears and mood music. The disgraceful decision to impose conditions on the Jewish labour movement who were delivering training and had been delivering training for some time across our CLPs, which made it impossible for them to continue to do it, and a leadership that is still now refusing to disclose to me or to you the submission that we made to the Equality and Human Rights Commission. I have asked for that. This is why I went out and spoke up. I spoke in that parliamentary debate and called for Ken Livingstone to be expelled. Why? Because a friend of mine came to see me whose children are at school in Manchester. And he told me that the day after Ken Livingstone had made some particularly disgraceful comments, they had a bomb scare at his children's school. And his 5-year-old twins lay on the floor face down with their hands on their heads for an hour until it was safe to be escorted out of the building and to go home. And he said they slept in their bed that night, trembling, and were still trembling the following morning. This does real harm to real people outside of this party. And that is why I've always spoken up, and I will always speak up, and I will not rest until we have dealt with this. And every single person who expresses anti-Semitism knows that they have no home in the Labour Party and they will no longer be welcome in the party that I lead.
If I could just, I think these are all sort of fairly shortish questions in terms of the answers. Fingers crossed. One of the things that I found personally quite shocking is after that panorama, which I imagine all of you thought was pretty horrendous in terms of how the disclosures of how badly the Labour Party dealt with anti-Semitism and how bullied and undermined various officials felt. The Labour Party put out a statement which broadly said these people who are complaining don't like Jeremy Corbyn and it's a sort of factional thing, it's got nothing to do with anti-Semitism, which I have to say I found profoundly shocking. And then these rather brave individuals have actually started action for defamation against the party. I'd just quite like to know, if you are leader, will you abandon the Labour Party's defence and simply settle with these brave people?
I would want to do more than just settle with them. Some of these people, some of them are in this room tonight, and some of them are my friends and have been my friends for a long time, but some of them are also people I didn't know until I watched that Panorama programme, and they are brave. And they were accused of being disloyal. But what is more disloyal than not standing up for our Labour values when they are in And so I will do more than just settle. I will make the Labour Party a place that values and celebrates that sort of action. A party where our culture is no longer defensive. When people raise concerns, when people speak up, they will be listened to and they will be heard and we will respond. Because, Luciana didn't just put up with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. She also put up with misogyny, and she put up with a culture of bullying, and she put up with it for too long. And this is a poison that has infected our party. It doesn't reflect our values. Our members deserve better, our party deserves better, the public deserve better, and I will ensure that we do it.
Rob, I remember that programme well, and being shocked by the response that was put out. And I think we had a shadow cabinet meeting the next morning, and I remember what I said to Jeremy. I said, I've never been in an organisation that turns on its staff before, ever. Because I said, what message do you think that sends, not just to the ex-staff, but to current staff, about what will happen if they speak out? They'll be branded disloyal. And this is wider than anti-Semitism, because it means you can't speak out on anything in the Labour Party. And I thought it was utterly wrong that that statement was put out. And I said that directly the very next morning. When I was Director of Public Prosecutions, I led my staff in a way where when we succeeded in something, we celebrated together. And when we got it wrong, I took responsibility. It was my responsibility. And that's how I would lead the Labour Party, and that's the message I would send to our staff. We succeed together, but if something goes wrong, the leader of the organisation carries the can and stands up for what's gone wrong and takes responsibility. I did that for 5 years. I'm proud of the fact that I did that, and that's exactly how I lead the Labour Party.
And you settled the case?
And I settled the case.
I think that it's been disclosed enough now for people to appreciate what a culture of bullying there has been developing in the Labour Party amongst staff, and I look up, note look in my staff's eye, and we look away again, because there is a culture, and we do have to deal with that. That's why when I said that we had to set up a disciplinary unit that dealt with a lot of things, it needs to deal with the culture of bullying as well that has happened. And the idea, and I said this publicly, that those, for example, who made the decisions about the general election keep their jobs, but the poor foot soldiers are the ones who are being made redundant, and the choices that were being made is part of that very culture of bullying. And it's unacceptable, and we need to make sure that actually that we go back to our core values. We go back to who we are as a Labour Party. We stand with our head up high because we know who we are or who we should be. But we also need to have radical changes to Southside, to the headquarters, and to the regions, and we need to be much better than we are, because my personal view is that we have to do all of that work in opposition in the next 5 years. It will be a great deal of work, it will be very difficult, and you need somebody tough to be able to implement this and to make sure it gets done, because there can be no more excuses. And we need to be in government in 5 years, so we have a lot to do. And we cannot get into government until we have been through a root and branch changes at our headquarters that will include a large number of things, but not least dealing with the culture of bullying.
So I don't think that the party gave the right response to what came up on that programme. And I think as the party of workers and trade unions, we should not, under any circumstances, have called out or attacked former members of staff. Whether we thought what they said was factually incorrect or not is a completely different matter. But what we need to do now, I mean, I think we should apologise for how we behaved in responding to that, if I'm honest, and we should settle any claims that are made. But we've also got to recognise what those particular staff were going through. We, as I said at the start, were a party that went from being a modest-sized party to a huge party, and they were dealing with a volume of complaints that they had never experienced before, with procedures and structures that weren't capable of being able to deal with them. They didn't get additional help, and they were working all the hours God sends to try and tackle this issue and process as many as they possibly could, and we need to recognise the stress and the strain that they are under, and again, that's something as leader that we need to make very, very clear to the public. An apology, settle, and the stress and strain that we had many of our workforce under at that particular time.
And in respect of a new culture of reconciliation, would you welcome Luciana Berger, Louise Elman back into the party?
I think that was absolutely devastating and shameful that we had MPs leaving the party because they didn't feel welcome in the party. And then we've got to take responsibility for that, and I've got to take responsibility for not doing enough. And I do feel like that. I felt like...
Because many Labour members would be angry if they came back, particularly in the case of Luciana, who challenged Labour. You're saying, actually, bygones are bygones, she had just cause to leave and you would welcome her back.
What Luciana, Louise and our other colleagues have been through was absolutely shocking. And how they managed to cope with that is an absolute miracle. And I think we need to recognise that and start to build bridges and rebuild trust.
Is that a yes, she'd come back?
I would, yeah.
Yeah, I'm on record saying that I think that the Labour Party will be getting to the right place when people who have left the party because of anti-Semitism feel that they have a place back in the party again. And obviously the abuse that particularly these two women went through was shocking, and I spoke to Luciana about it over a large number of years. I get anti-Semitic abuse as well, and it's nothing compared to the amount that I know that they get, and it's because of my position as being Shadow Foreign Secretary, because of my position in relation to Israel, and because my husband's family are Jewish, and so I get all kinds of abuse, and report it to the police, and when it's Labour Party members, I report it to the Labour Party. But I have a member of staff who, over the years, is completely committed to the Labour Party, but she won't go to family weddings and admit that she works for the Labour Party. I don't know why. I've got it under my bottle there. Is that better?
So, was that better? You really can't hear anything?
We can't hear them and they can't hear us.
Do I go like that?
Sorry.
Anyway, the point is that I've got a member of staff who can't go to family weddings and events and admit that she works for the Labour Party, and that is truly and profoundly depressing, and that has happened over the last few years, and should never happen. We should be proud of being working for the Labour Party, no matter what our backgrounds, and we should be able to boast about it at family weddings, quite frankly, and we are such a long way away from that.
I would welcome them back. I'd welcome anybody back who feels they've had to leave our party over anti-Semitism. And that was the discussion I had with Louise Ellman. She said to me, Keir, I'm not going to join another party. I've been in this party, I think she's been in the party for 50 years. She said, I'm not going anywhere, I just can't be in this party anymore. And that's when I was talking to her that I said the test that I would apply is when people like Louise or anybody in that situation feels that they can return to the Labour Party. But I want the Labour Party to return to its values. That the fact that the party that the Jewish community turned to and supported for so long has got itself into this position is just so devastating for all of us. And it's devastating for all of the members who are clearly not anti-Semitic, because they feel that our party's got a stain on it. And it's on them, all of our members who work so hard in our party. They desperately want us to deal with this and return to our values. And I just hope that the next time myself or any of us are in here or having a discussion with you, we can proudly say that we've taken the action that's necessary and that we've moved on and restored that trust. Because that, I think, is where we so desperately need to get to.
I mean, I would welcome them back into the Labour Party, but I think we're so far away from that at the moment, in terms of many of the people who left wanting to come back, that I think we've got a much bigger job of work to do. And I want to thank some of those people as well, because over the last few years, when I've heard what and seen what was going on and stuck my neck out, the amount of abuse that I've had, only a fraction of the abuse that people in this room have had to put up with on a daily basis, has been horrendous. I mean, you'll remember me coming on your show and having a row with a very senior member of the shadow cabinet about the way in which he said the handling of anti-Semitism cases had taken place. I knew for a fact it wasn't true, and I knew I had to say so. And I knew I had to speak up at that moment, and the amount of abuse that I got, particularly on social media, the threats of deselections, the threats full stop, was absolutely horrendous. And I'll tell you that 3 people rang me immediately. One was a friend from the Jewish Labour movement, one was Luciana, and one was a friend from Hope Not Hate. And the 3 together made sure that there were people out fighting for me and defending me. Now, I want to thank you for standing with me, and I want to say sorry that there weren't more people standing with you. And most of all, I want those people who've left to know that we don't just want them back because they had to leave the Labour Party because they were Jewish and it was incompatible with being in our party, as important as that is. I want Louise Ellman back in the Labour Party because she was one of the best chairs of the Transport Select Committee we've ever had. And I want Luciana back because we can't afford to do without the work that she was doing on mental health. And I don't ever again want to be in a position where our Jewish MPs are seen only as Jewish MPs and defined by that and can't fight the fights and the battles that we need to fight as a Labour Party for the betterment of the people of this country.
We're going to move on in just a moment. I've got another quick question. None of them turned out to be that quick. I mean, as everybody in this room knows, I am an astonishingly impartial journalist. But my father gave his entire life to the Labour Party, worked for the Labour Party in various capacities, and he died not long before the scourge of anti-Semitism became so apparent within the party, and he just wouldn't have believed that the Labour Party would be referred to the Equality and Human Rights Commission. I mean, he literally would not comprehend that it had happened. I suppose, so 2 final questions before we move on. One is, if the EHRC delivers a finding of institutional racism or any kind of serious criticism, first of all, how radical will you be in implementing those decisions, making sure that people, if they are named as culpable, no longer hold a position? And second, it's a very easy question, this one. One senior member of the party has been nominated for a peerage. Some people think this person is implicated in the anti-Semitism problem, should that person get a peerage before the EHRC report is published?
So I'm very clear that I'll implement the findings of the EHRC in full and all of those recommendations, and if those recommendations relate to individuals, then they will be implemented. I've said I'll do that as a minimum because, in all honesty, I'm not sure what the EHRC is going to do, and I don't know how tough they're going to be. But as a bare minimum, I will also set up an independent process to deal with complaints and to deal with them swiftly. We'll adopt the IHRA definition in full. No ifs, no buts, no equivocations. I never ever again want to be in a situation standing in the Parliamentary Labour Party, watching Jewish MPs and allies begging the shadow cabinet to take seriously the concerns that they had about the IHRA, and the response from the top table being, we know better than you what racism looks like. I don't want to see us making recommendations to the House of Lords at all, if I'm honest, because I think that this is a game now to the public where we stack it with our old boys network and they stack it with theirs. It's political cronyism. Someone has to break the cycle, and I want to see us break it. In relation to individuals, I've always believed that the leader takes responsibility for the actions of the people that he or she appoints, and I will not blame advisors. If I'm the leader of this party, I will take responsibility for what happens on my watch myself. There is a committee, a commission, that is set up within the appointment system for the House of Lords that investigates the fitness of people to be in the House of Lords. I will be watching that to make sure that that is robust and that that does its job thoroughly. I won't attack individuals. I don't believe that's what we do in the Labour Party. We take responsibility as political leaders of this party. That is what I did when I was in the Shadow Cabinet. That is what I will do as your leader. And I won't be making appointments to the House of Lords full stop if I become the leader of the Labour Party.
I'll obviously work with the Commission and implement their recommendations. I thought we should have early recommendations so we could start changing this sooner, because even this process is taking a long time. But I don't think that it's right to simply wait for the Commission. The next leader of the Labour Party has to get on with this on day one. We don't need a Commission to tell us that things need to change. And there's no inhibition. We don't want to wait 3 months, 6 months, 9 months for a report to come out. We've got to deal with this on day one and demonstrate what a change of leadership actually means in this. So actually, I'd want to go further than that and go more quickly than that. Why do we need to wait for the Commission to report? Though, of course, it will be an important report, and of course, those recommendations will have to be implemented. On the question of a peerage, I think what's going on at the moment just makes the case for the abolition of the House of Lords and an elected Senate of all the regions and nations, because, exactly as Lisa said, these appointments of people in reward for what? Are bringing the whole system even further into disrepute. So let's take the opportunity to change it.
I think to a certain extent I've already answered this. I've said that we should implement the EHRC recommendations. We need to basically get on the phone to them once the leadership competition is over and work with them and make sure that the new political capital that the new leader has is used to implement the EHRC recommendations. So we need to work together on that. And as for people being sent up to the House of Lords, I am completely against political cronies being given peerages, whether they are Tory or Labour. I think that it stinks. I think that it stank under Cameron, and I think that we shouldn't be doing it either. I think that just because you've been a friend of the leader doesn't mean that you should be, or that you've worked in his team or whatever it is, you shouldn't be getting a peerage as a result of that. And of course we need to have the form of the House of Lords, but we've talked about this for decades, haven't we? But of course we need to, but one thing we can do straight away is give a commitment here and now, no cronies going into the House of Lords.
Well, I think if the EHRC does come back with that, it will be the darkest day that our party has ever seen. But we already know how bad it is. And I just wanted to mention a story. I remember I was canvassing with one of our councillors in Bury a while ago, and we met a lady called Rachel. She was previously a Jewish member. She was in her 80s and she was lovely. And we toddled down the drive and we had a chat. And we said, oh, you're gonna get involved and you're gonna vote Labour? And she's like, no, I can't vote for this party anymore. You're anti-Semitic. And that's bad enough in itself. But Rachel ran the Labour Party for over 60 years in that area. The committee rooms were in her house. She went through every Labour leadership under the sun. And for a woman like that to lose faith in the party, they were in a very, very serious situation. So of course we've got to act upon all of the EHRC recommendations swiftly and without question. We've got to adopt the 10 pledges that the Board of Deputies have set out, and we've got to roll out a robust educational programme within our party with the JLM. And in terms of individuals being appointed to the House of Lords, I don't agree with people being appointed to the House of Lords because it should be abolished, not least because it's not accountable to our communities. But I've never agreed with political parties, whether it's the government or the opposition, appointing people who've worked for the party, because that is no basis to appoint people to a body that's responsible for making our legislation.
So I now wanted, before we completely run out of time, to ask Noah, is it Libson? Where's Noah? Ah, hello Noah. Have you got a microphone? Right, okay. You'll have to. Do you want to come all the way up? You can just whisper it in my ear and then I can. It's hot, isn't it?
It's really hot.
There you go.
It's
What's it?
2038.
Hold on. Hold on.
So my question is about left-wing and right-wing populism. We're seeing a rise in both left-wing and right-wing populism. I want to know how a pragmatic left-wing party can firstly win a general election, but also combat this populism that we're seeing all over the world.
There we go, nice easy one. Who wants to kick
Okay.
off? You're going to go, right.
I think if we were to look, if we were to be together 15 years ago, we would not, frankly, be able to believe that the sort of leaders that we were having internationally are now on the world stage. No one would believe, seriously, 15 years ago, that Donald Trump would be elected, or frankly Boris Johnson would be elected, or Bolsonaro, or there are a whole range of people who are most definitely right-wing populists who seem to be grabbing power and keeping it. I think that there are a number of questions about this, and I think one of the practical questions is the use of Facebook. And I think that there is a formula, I think, that the right internationally are using, and we need, on the left, to be able to find a formula to answer it. And we need to work internationally in order to be able to do that, because I think that there is an invidious influence, and I think that there is a coordination between some of these right-wing populists, and I think they do work together, and you can see them working together. You can see individuals coming and advising this person, and then suddenly they pop up somewhere else, and they suddenly appear in Australia, and then they're back again. So I think that we should be very mindful of it, because I think that we have to take seriously the way in which democracy is undermined by this type of populism, and I think the wheel will turn. I think it won't always be like this. I think that we need to stand our ground and be grown-up politicians who aren't able necessarily to always give easy, sometimes three-word answers to complex issues. And we need to show intelligence and commitment and passion, and show that there is room for people to think through where you take the country and why, as opposed to just simply living in the world of soundbites.
There's undoubtedly a growth of populism in America and across pretty well all of Europe. And you can see that over the last 10 years, 15 years, and it's deeply concerning as to where that takes us as a set of nations and as a world. And we have to call it out, we have to defeat it, we have to take practical action. And that's why I was a big supporter of Frans Timmermans, who's now the Vice President of the EU Commission, in relation to Hungary and Poland, where it's slipping not just into populism, but but to a complete attack on human rights and the rule of law, because that's where populism goes next. So of course we have to take it on, we have to see it for what it is, we need to recognise the extent of it, but we also, I think, have to recognise that it's come from somewhere. It's come from somewhere, and I think it's the political and economic failure, actually, in the last 10 to 15 years that has inflamed this, a genuine sense from people that the system, the model hasn't worked for them, that's driven people into this space. And some of the old ways of thinking that, you know, if you just have a free market model, let business run the economy, in the end, wealth will trickle down and it'll be all right for everyone. That's busted. That's busted. And so, of course, we take it on, of course, we rail against it, of course, we call it out politically. But I think we also need some self-reflection on the political and economic failure of the last 10 to 15 years across Europe and across the US. Because in the end, I think that will be the only way of defeating this.
Can I just sort of broaden it a little? Can I just borrow that for a second? Can I just broaden it a little, just because I think there's a sort of related issue with the views of the Labour Party, which the Labour Party has always stood for, what you might call social justice, essentially creating opportunities, particularly for the poorest. But we live in a time of identity obsession, identity politics. It's what the populists play to. And I think part of this question is about, can the Labour Party recover with a different kind of message, or do you actually have to play along with this identity politics? Some of which I think many people in this room would regard as pernicious, because frankly it's also been associated with the rise of anti-Semitism.
Go on, you go.
Oh, great, thanks very much. Well, first of all, I think that we should recognise that we've been engulfed by populism, not just across the world, but in our political debate in recent years. I first started to understand how difficult this was going to be during the 2014 Scottish independence referendum, when the combination of populism and nationalism had just completely and utterly taken us by surprise and had wiped us out, and within a few years had wiped out our political representation, parliamentary political representation in Scotland, with a few exceptions. And then, of course, we had the referendum and a populist narrative that started to poison our politics, that posed simple solutions to complex problems, that stoked people's anger but left it with nowhere to go, and most of all questioned the system and questioned people's motives. It was deliberately designed to shake our faith in ourselves and each other and in the system as a whole. And I started to notice then that it wasn't just the right that was at it, it was the left as well. And I think we have to be honest, actually, that at every level in the Labour Party we've seen examples of populism over the last few years. And this is really, really dangerous. And I was reminded of it a moment ago in the section of the debate around anti-Semitism, because when we got beyond the point where we were just running a shambolic process and failing to offer leadership, we got to the point where we were questioning the motives of people like the whistleblowers in our party who spoke up and spoke out. And that is a deliberate tactic that populists use, and we have got to be alive to the fact that, as you said when you asked the question, this is not something that infects only the right alone, this is something that infects the left as well. So what is the answer? Well, the answer is to understand the scale of the crisis we face. When people like Nigel Farage make the argument that representative democracy itself is no longer fit for purpose, I think in many parts of this country they are winning that argument. So I think we have to understand that the entire system is at risk of collapse unless we defend it. But to defend it, we have to show that we understand how deeply disconnected representative democracy has become from people's lives. How could it possibly be that in 2016 we had become so disconnected as a party that in the 6 months that we spent fighting that referendum, we just simply didn't see that result coming? The shockwaves that it sent around Westminster, Whitehall and the lobby were unbelievable. They were a sign of a system that just couldn't hear what was happening in large parts of the country and could provide no response to it. And over again in recent years, we've compounded that problem. We just haven't heard what people are telling us. And for 5 years now, I've been saying that in coalfield towns like mine and many other parts of the country, the ground is shaking beneath our feet. People believe that a political settlement that is not delivering them any kind of power, agency or control over their own lives, their families' lives, the communities that they want to live in and the future of the economy that they want to build will just simply not do. If we want to tackle populism, we have to stand up to it on the left as well as the right. We have to grapple with the very real complex solutions to the problems people have. In this contest in particular, we have to stop pretending that the answers to the big challenges we face are easy, and we have to grapple with the complexity, and we have to tell the truth. And most of all, we have to go out there with courage and ambition for the future of this country and work with people to find the answers.
Extremely dangerous times. You only need to look at what's happened in the USA. You only need to listen to the poisonous and divisive rhetoric that was whipped up by elements of the far right, even in the Brexit discussions that have been happening over the last 4 years. And many things that I thought were consigned to the dustbin of history, racist comments, tropes and things that had never been heard since the 1960s or 1970s became acceptable again. And we've got to recognise that all of this hadn't just happened by accident. It happened because people in our communities were suffering economically and indeed in other countries across the world. And whenever we see that economic model break down and the growth of inequality being exacerbated on a level that we've never seen before, we see the growth of populism. And our role as a Labour Party is A, to stamp that out and call out that divisive rhetoric where we see it. B, to have a model that we can replace our broken economy with, which we will have and we did have to an extent in the last general election. But C, we've got to have a message, and you said about whether we needed to change our message going forward. We do need to change our message because sometimes I think even though our policies weren't populist, we came across as sounding populist sometimes, instead of having a message that tried to reach out right across our communities, whether they were north or south, whether they were rich or poor, whatever postcode they were. And that's why I think it's really important to centre our next election around that aspiration and better quality of life for our communities. We'll never outdo the populists, we should never try to. We should always act with our moral compass and act as a signpost, not a weather vane.
Robert, just briefly, you asked the question whether we should play along with this, and the answer has to be no. Absolutely not. And there's a tendency on some politicians, or by some politicians, say there's a kind of veto for people, that our policies can't be right, they've got to be vetoed because people don't agree with us. This is a slippery slope of populism. You could see it in the referendum. And where does it go next? Anti-immigration? Do we allow that to be a veto to shape where we go next as a party, or do we stand up for our values? So we cannot allow this to be a veto over the values and the direction of travel for the Labour Party. We are not delegates, we're not having vetoes here, we're in a battle of ideas. In the referendum, that phrase, take back control, was a Heineken phrase. It really got into people, because they didn't feel they had enough control over their own lives. And as everybody will know, I voted and campaigned for Remain in Camden. We voted very heavily for Remain. And that's why I've actually spent the last 3 years going out mainly to areas that voted to leave, to have conversations with people, and knotty and difficult conversations they are too. But once we got past the knotty business of Brexit and started to talk about what actually matters, I detected something else, a yearning for infrastructure and transport to be much better. A real yearning for dignity in jobs and security in jobs. And a real pride in the town or village or area that people came from. And therefore, when people say this is the identity, actually that's the identity that some of the media are pretending is the only identity in some of these areas. And it's just not true. And it doesn't do any service to people who live in leave areas or towns to pretend that that's what everybody thinks. I found incredible initiatives in towns, incredible community spirit in towns, a real pride and a real patriotism, and we shouldn't be scared of that either. I actually think that we can make the argument that as a party of 580,000 people, the Labour Party, going out in the rain and the snow and the wind to campaign in elections, we're patriotic. We are doing that because we want a better country. I want to lead the Labour Party and I want to lead the country because I want a better country. You can't get more patriotic than that.
I think we all know what Keir's means now. Sort of that. Can we
Do you mind if I
yeah,
just make one very brief comment, and that's this. I mean, let's not mess around here. The baseline of populism is dividing people up into them and us. I mean, that's what it is. And and when people are facing big problems, what they want to do is they want to blame the other, and they don't want it to be their fault. They want to blame the other, and that's when things go really bad. And we have a responsibility as politicians to never play those games and to call it out. And frankly, anyone who plays the race card in Britain as a politician should never, ever be forgiven. And the Labour Party must never allow that to happen to us.
I mean, just I don't know whether we want to go on to this. Maybe the bit of the them and us that you didn't address is the bit that Boris Johnson is amazingly, for an old Etonian, exploiting remarkably well, which is that he has set up his government as the opponent of a London elite that is allegedly doing down working people, and the Labour Party simply hasn't had an effective response.
I agree.
To that. Do any of you think you've got a way of responding?
Yeah. So, a few years ago, when I left the front bench, I went off back home to Wigan to try and work out how to be the bridge. My constituents voted 2/3 to a third Leave and Remain. I campaigned strongly for Remain in all of those areas, Sunderland, Redcar, Bolton, Bury, Wigan, where people with lifelong Labour voters were on the other side of the question from us on one of those fundamental issues. And Brexit wasn't the only issue. This had been a long, long time coming. There is a really, really strong feeling back home and in many parts of this country that we are a party, not that they have left, but that has left them and has been moving away from people for a very long time. There's a feeling that we don't talk about the things that most matter to people out there in the country. There's a reason I've been banging on about buses for the last 10 years, and that's because for all the arguments about High Speed 2 in Westminster, most people out there on the country are travelling on buses. And this isn't just about whether you can get around or not. This is about whether you can get home on time to read your kids a bedtime story. This is about whether you can take up an apprenticeship or not. This is about whether you can get home to care for your disabled partner or not. This is about the fabric of people's communities and people's lives being tugged away. And for 40 years we've had a settlement in this country that has seen us lose industry in our towns and invest in the cities in the hopes that the benefits will trickle out. It hasn't. It's fundamentally failed to deliver for most people, and so young people have been faced with a choice between love, family and home, work, the future and opportunity. And so they've moved away, and with them they've taken the spending power, and you can see the scars on our high streets and the cancelled bus networks and the boarded up pubs and shops, and older people growing old, hundreds of miles away from children and grandchildren. And they are angry about a political system that hasn't understood this and hasn't responded. But where did those young people go? Well, they went to London and to Manchester and to Nottingham and to Glasgow, where now high house prices and congestion and air pollution and chronic underfunding of public services are ruining people's lives. This is the consequence of a settlement that underappreciates some parts of our economy and writes them off as communities, and overheats other parts of our economies and writes off the people in those communities. We can do so much better than that. But it isn't just a question, as Boris Johnson and the Tories say, of getting money and investment into those places. It's a question fundamentally of respect, of understanding that people in those communities know far, far better than we do how that money should be invested and how that money should be spent. They see the potential in their communities, not just their problems. And the Labour government that I will lead will understand that and will work with people in every part of this country to build the Britain that I know we can be. I didn't join the Labour Party just because I hate the Tories, although I hate what they've done to our communities. I joined the Labour Party because I know that this country can be far, far better than the country that I've ever seen. And we will build this in every region and nation of the UK, and we will build it together.
Firstly, Robert, the idea that Boris Johnson's anti-elite is just breathtaking in terms of what he is and where he comes from. But one of the mistakes that we've made, and I think we've made this in the Labour Party recently, is to divide people into either the elite, the 1% at the top who are rigging everything, or the completely downtrodden with nothing at the bottom. And there's a huge, huge gap in the middle, where people are neither the elite, rigging the system, nor completely downtrodden. They just want to get on. And the Labour dream was about getting on. My dad was a toolmaker, my mum was a nurse, and what Labour meant for them was very straightforward. It was that their children and the next generation would have a better chance and greater opportunities than they had. And so when I went to university, that was such a big thing for my parents, because this was the living proof of what the Labour dream was. And so when we divide people and talk about the elite, or the completely downtrodden who we stand with, we're missing a huge part here. The Labour Party is the party of solidarity. Of course we stand with people who need our solidarity, and quite rightly too. But we're also the party of opportunity. And we've not been saying that enough. We're the party that wants people to live more fulfilling lives because they got better opportunities. And that, equal opportunities, much talked about over many decades, I feel it's slipped away in the last 10 years. I don't think it's really there. Where you're born, what your background is, your gender, your race, matter still much more than they should. So let's stop dividing in this way that puts people just in the little bracket at the top or the little bracket at the bottom and misses the massive bit in the middle.
I'm going to try and answer your question, because I think your question was slightly different, which was, how is it that Boris Johnson gets away with not being seen as part of the London elite, and that he's now, it seems, the champion of the North? So clearly he didn't win all those seats in the north of England because he came from the north of England. And clearly he is an old Etonian, and indeed he was one of my constituents. And he moved out of my constituency because he said that everybody kept shouting at him. And could I stop them shouting at him? And I said, no, Boris, you deserve it, quite frankly. Given all the lies you told during the Brexit election, the referendum, and people were just very upset about what it is that he had done. But I think that actually what this comes down to is a lack of professionalism on our part in the Labour Party and the way that the Tories are able to run rings around us. I think that we have to take them on, and we have to call it out, and we have to be able to take on Boris Johnson and all his nonsense and all his lies and all the manipulation, and we have to say it as it is, because the idea that the Tory party is now the party of the working man is manifest nonsense, and they will spout a great deal of carbon but not be able to deliver anything. And we, as a proper professional opposition that is doing its job properly, will need to call it out with a clear, loud voice. We need to have the Labour Party led by somebody who is articulate, who can take them on, who is not afraid, who tells it as it is, who has, frankly, shadowed Boris Johnson for 2 years and held him to account at the dispatch box, and doesn't let them get away with all this tosh. You know, I have done 7 front bench jobs over the last few years. I am experienced and ready to go, and it's for that reason that I put myself forward for, frankly, the worst job in the world, which is being leader of the Labour Party when we're in opposition. But we have a serious job of work to do, which is holding the Tories to account and fundamentally changing the way the Labour Party is organised and getting us back on the road again so that we can be the next government in 5 years' time, because quite frankly, our country needs us.
I think Boris Johnson has been setting a trap for us ever since he was running his own leadership campaign. He planned to run on a Brexit-only election, and he convinced our communities that we'd undermined their wishes to the extent that they were angry with us, and they saw us as part of the establishment instead of the answer, instead of the reality where Boris is the actual establishment. Now, they want us to retreat from a programme of transformation. They want us to retreat from many of our economic policies that would have rebuilt our economy from the ground up. They want us to retreat from investing in many of our deindustrialised regions and nations, and we can't do that. Because if we retreat from that vision of hope, that realisation of our community's aspirations, we will never win another general election, because we will be seen as the problem, as part of the establishment. So we have to go out there and we have to recognise what went wrong in this general election. We lost trust within our communities on a number of issues. We've already talked about anti-Semitism. Brexit was another one. And the third one was, despite having the most transformative policies we've had in a generation, we didn't articulate them properly, and we didn't encapsulate them around a vision or a narrative that really resonated with our communities and said to them that the Labour Party is the party of quality of life. It is about making sure that your children will always have a better life than you. Now, that's a party we can be again, and we should always be proud of that.
We're almost out of time, and so what I'm going to do is, I did promise that I would get all 4 sections in. I'm going to ask the last 2 questioners, Julie Graham and Rebecca Simon, to ask their questions at the same time, one of which I think is quite easy and one of which I think is not so easy. So are you Julie, or... Hello, Julie. Fine. There we go. And is Rebecca around? Okay, so Rebecca, could you ask yours at the same time? There we go. Julie, you go first.
It's quite a tough crowd. Is in the most dire state of crisis, and is having an impact on the hospitals.
Yes.
They are absolutely completely. So when people can take that waiting. Sorry.
It's about social care, the dire state of social care in our hospitals.
Social care is in a dire state of crisis, and it impacts on hospitals. They are conjoined at the hip.
Yeah.
So that when you get long waiting times in A&E, it's because that people can't be discharged.
That's right.
And they can't be discharged because there isn't a social care system in place. And people like me are having to what's called self-fund, which is, I think, a very bad state of affairs. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Thanks, Julie. And we're just going to take the other question now, so we make sure we cover everything. So if you could ask your question as well, please.
Yes, hi. Would any of you describe yourselves as a Zionist?
As a Zionist. Would any of you describe yourself as a Zionist? Right. So, microphones back. We're going to be grateful for the microphones. There we go. So, who's going to start? Right. There we go.
Thank you. I believe in the state of Israel, therefore I'm a Zionist. And as for social care, I couldn't have put it better myself. I mean, I think that it's absolutely disgraceful that in this country there are elderly women being put to bed at 5 o'clock in the evening because there's no one there to look after them. There are people with disabilities who are not getting washed every day. There are people who have to make a choice between being fed or being washed. This is Britain in the 21st century. We are one of the richest countries in the world. And if the National Health Service is the closest thing we have to a national religion, then social care, I don't know, why do we exclude social care? It's the same thinking. It's the same thinking. It's like it's poor, starved little sister. You know, and of course it undermines the National Health Service. So not only is it totally immoral and wrong that we have our most vulnerable not being looked after, but it undermines the NHS because people end up going into hospital in crisis because no one's been looking after them, and then they can't get out again because there isn't anybody to look after them. And of course it undermines the NHS. I think that we should integrate health and social care. I've been saying so for years, as did Barbara Castle 40 years ago, you know, but it's about time we did it, and we have to fund it properly, and frankly, we should stop messing around. We should stop messing around. It needs to be paid for out of the taxation. Of course it should.
I agree with Emily on social care. It's a complete disgrace, and we shouldn't treat as a luxury washing and cleaning and helping people and clothing people and the basic support that is needed in social care. The staff are overrun, they're not paid properly, the conditions are poor, and there's no framework around it. We've been arguing about this for a very, very long time. We need a national care system equivalent to the National Health Service. And I don't think anybody who needs social care is prepared anymore to put up with the argument that it's just too difficult. It was difficult to set up the NHS. It'll be difficult to set up a national care system, but we need it, and we've got to be brave enough to do it, and it should be absolutely central in any manifesto put forward at the next general election. But I'll say this, because we go on these hustings, and people ask us questions, what are you going to do? And we argue about it, and you say, I like that, I don't like that, I think that's better. We've just lost 4 elections. If we don't win the next one, we can talk all afternoon, all day, all night about what we're going to do about social care, and it's not going to happen. And we need to focus on that. We can have all the ideas under the sun, ding-dong battles on every policy issue. We've lost 4 in a row. And for all of them saying it was this issue in the last election, people like one issue because they think that is nice and easy. We've lost 4. We've got to change that. We've got to get from where we are into power, because if we don't, social care is not going to improve under this government. So let's focus on the task ahead. I believe in the state of Israel, a secure Israel. I also believe in an independent Palestinian state. Thank you.
You did actually say, the Jewish Labour movement believes in a 2-state solution. The Jewish Labour movement would say they were Zionists. Are you a Zionist?
Well, I don't know how many people know this. My parents' family are Jewish, and we've got extended family in Israel. That we feel this every day. I don't describe myself as a Zionist, but I understand and I sympathise and I support Zionism. So I wouldn't describe myself in that way, but of course, you know, we have family in Israel, and that is part of my family.
I believe that Jewish people have the right to national self-determination. That makes me a Zionist. I've hated the way that the word has become weaponised in the Labour Party over the last few years. I've been Vice Chair and then Chair of Labour Friends of Palestine and the Middle East for the last 8 of the 10 years that I've served in Parliament. And I believe in a 2-state solution, and a 2-state solution means you have to have 2 states. And I believe that we have to stand up to people who say that you can achieve peace in the Middle East with only 1 state. I don't believe it's right, and I don't believe it's morally fair. And I've gone out and fought these battles over the last 10 years, and I've done it especially when it's hard. That's why I went to conference the year that there was an attempt to ban Labour Friends of Israel. and told a rally, not at Labour Friends of Israel, but at Labour Friends of Palestine, that nobody who was trying to ban Labour Friends of Israel from the Labour Party had a place in the Labour Party, and I will always speak up for them. On social care, I said this morning at one of the very many hustings that we've been doing in this contest, that one of the thing that keeps me awake at night and troubles me in the morning before I even start to think about all the things that we've got to come and do in this leadership contest is the fact that I've got a young son in Wigan and obligations to my family, and that I rely very heavily on the support of my two parents who are growing old at different ends of the country. And I worry about that all the time, and in that I'm no different to any of you. But I think we have to be honest then if we want to solve this. First of all, that we'll fund it. And that's one of the reasons why I've said in this contest that I want to see, at a minimum, wealth taxes brought in line with income taxes. Because we all stood on a platform and a manifesto a few months ago where we said that we would put 5% on the top rate of income tax. But we need to be honest that that isn't enough. That is not where the wealth is. The wealth is in assets. And if you want to fund social care properly, you have to tax assets as well. I think Keir is right to say that we're not in power and we've lost elections in 2010, 2015, 2017 and 2019, and we need to start winning if we want to build the country we want to see. But we may not be in power nationally, but we should never believe that we're powerless. And there are two things that we could do right now. The first is there are some parts of the country where we do have the power to change this. In Greater Manchester, where I'm a Member of Parliament, Andy Burnham has control of health and social care, and we should be on the front foot there, and I know he feels passionately about it, and we should be rolling together health and social care so that we can get help to people when they need it and not when it reaches crisis point. And by doing so, we tell a story and we shame the Tories to show them that it is possible and to show them the cost of their inaction. But secondly, I'll just say this, is that the only way that we'll build a lasting settlement on social care is to build a cross-party consensus. Now that has become a dirty word in the Labour Party in recent years, but as your leader, I will reach across the political divide and show the courage to do it.
I was part of that when I was Shadow Social Care Minister, and I tried. I went to number 10. My point is.
Let me just finish this.
My point is,
this matters deeply to people across this country, and I want to say
I'll bring you in a second.
Yeah. Is that we should be reaching out across the political divide, and there are many people in the Labour Party, Liz Kendall included, who've done a lot of work on this in recent years. But when, in 2010, Andy Burnham tried to bring in a settlement that would solve this, the Tories labelled it a death tax. And in 2017, when Theresa May tried to solve this, we called it a dementia tax. We can't afford to go on like this. We need to be far more ambitious, far more honest, and far more brave.
Sorry. I was just, as a matter of interest, just trying to feed in my experience, because when you talk about the two parties coming together, being one of the ones who was, when I was Shadow Social Care Minister, I went to number 10 and I tried to engage. And to be honest, we just sat around a table and it was like, go on, then you go first. Go on, what have you got to say? And there was no trust between the two parties at all. And so I think it sounds good to say the two parties need to come together, but just from my own experience, it ain't going to happen. And we just have to take the lead. You know, I know it's not good enough, but I'm telling you, having spent, many weeks going backwards and forwards to number 10, and we just sit there and kind of go, well, so what are we going to talk about now? It just didn't work. And if either of us had moved, then there just wasn't the trust, and it's even worse now. So I think we just have to just say Labour needs to develop its own policies and go for a general election and get the public behind us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, we agree with each other from time to time, and I agree with a lot of the comments that our candidates have made already. Social care is in crisis. And I think it's right to work on a cross-party basis, but I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that Boris Johnson is going to be in favour of a publicly funded, publicly led social care system anytime soon, because he isn't in favour of that. And we need to fight every step of the way, because there are people who will be in my city tonight in Salford who won't be able to put themselves to bed. They won't have been able to cook their own tea. They won't be getting the help that they deserve. At the same time, we've got our carers meeting on Saturday to talk about strike action because they're being paid less than the real living wage. They can't pay their rent. They can't provide for their children. That's not a system that we should be proud of. I want to have my parents and my loved ones, when they need that care, looked after people that are respected, well paid and feel secure in their jobs. And we need to be proud to make the case for that. On Zionism, I mean, I also agree with a secure Israel alongside a viable Palestinian state and a two-state solution, and I suppose that makes me a Zionist because I agree with Israel's right to exist and right to self-determine.
So we're unfortunately out of time. Can I? You can't get enough of them at Klasky, but probably not tonight. If I'm going to use my chairman's prerogative, and I'm just going to ask you a question, okay? If you could put your hand up if, in general, you think of yourselves as a sort of Labour supporter. Put your hand up if you think of yourself as a Labour supporter. Right. Now, keep your hand up. I want to see all the Labour supporters. Now, keep your hand up if you voted Labour in the last election. Right, okay, so that's a pretty shocking thing, I think. Now, put your hand up if, on the basis of what you've heard from these four candidates, you're more likely to vote Labour again, please. Well, there we are. I think for these candidates, that looks like a bit of a result. I've got to run off. I want to thank my mum for not barracking me. Shall I share with you, I only know one joke, and I always think of it when we're talking about the Labour Party. Shall I share my one joke? So my one joke is this, many of you will know it. So Moishe has died, and it's his funeral, and the rabbi is presiding, and he hasn't got anybody to come up and say some positive things about Moishe, and he says to those there, he says, come on, there must be somebody here who wants to come up and say something nice about Moishe. Come on, must be a member of the family. Nobody comes up. There must be a friend. Nobody comes up. He said, come on, you've got to be able to say something. And right from the back of the room, I don't know why I always think of Labour when you hear this, somebody pipes up, his brother was worse.
I just want to say a huge thanks, first of all, to Robert, also, thank you very much to Lisa Manley, to Sophia Steiner,
I think they're going to come back to me.
I'm sure many of you will have heard comments today, and as we saw from Robert's show of hands, I'm sure more of you will be looking to vote in potentially as a result of what we've heard today. I know that many of you will have seen the news this week and will be aware of the news of the merger between the Jewish News and the Jewish Parliament. Questions have been abound. Will there be one paper or two? What will it be called? Will be the editor? Now let me stop one rumour here and now. Any suggestion that Robert is planning to use this as a launch pad for the top job of the merged product is utterly unfounded. A massive thanks to our partners, Labour Friends of Israel, to Jen and Adrian, to the Jewish Labour Movement, to Mike, Peter, and especially Rebecca Filer. It's always a pleasure teaming up with these organisations, and thank you also to the amazing team that we've created to reduce those mistakes. JLA being 100 years old today, but it's great to see you're still pulling in the crowds like never before. I would sing a chorus happy birthday, but frankly this organisation has suffered enough in recent years. Finally, particular thanks, as I say, to the four candidates who really set them to the line and say. The size of today's audience shows the hope of so many in the Jewish community for a decisive end to this nightmare of the last 4 years. For a return to those days when mainstream Jews could feel welcome again within the party. It really doesn't seem too much to ask for. We've had plenty of positive words and intentions tonight, and that's welcome. But it will be up to one of the politicians on our stage to lead from the front, to follow words with actions, if there is to be any chance of repairing relations. It will be up to the Jewish News and to other media outlets. I'm glad to see Lee Hoppett from the Jewish Chronicle here today, to hold them to account, to ensure the promises of this campaign become a reality. Fulfilling of those pledges must not be the end of those efforts, they must just be the start.